Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the spread of anti-Muslim sentiment in the West. My guest is Arsalan Iftikhar. He's the author of Scapegoats: How Islamophobia Helps Our Enemies and Threatens Our Freedoms. You talk in the book about the alienating impact that Islamophobia have on young people. You write, because of increased Islamophobia in the West today, many young Muslims in the United States and Europe feel like strangers in a strange land. Elaborate on that.
Well, Anand, I think it's really important to keep in mind that the vast majority of Muslims that live in Western diasporas, primarily in the United States and in Western Europe, were native to these countries. We were born and raised in these nations, and for a new generation of young Muslims who are being raised in these Western societies, we're starting to see, for example, an increase in the amount of bullying that is happening against Muslim students all over the West. Just a couple of weeks ago in California, there was a young Muslim high school student, female, who wears the hijab, the headscarf, who in her high school's annual yearbook was inadvertently labeled Isis Phillips. And of course, the school called it a typographical error, but it's sort of hard to believe that sort of thing would happen. We have Muslim girls who are being attacked in playgrounds in schools, having their headscarves pulled off. We have young Muslim boys who are called ISIS on the soccer field. So I mean, there's an entire generation of young Muslim children in the West that are being marginalized at very young ages, and that's what's most disconcerting, is that obviously, we don't want them to feel excluded from their societies, because that's exactly, the type of people that, can be potentially recruited by these extremist groups. And so it's really important to thread the needle and bridge the divide, and it's not just calling out xenophobia as xenophobia being wrong, which it is, but it also is, as Americans and as Westerners who want our societies to be safe for all people, it's important that we try to be as inclusive as possible, because science has found that being excluded from a group triggers activity in the same regions of the brain associated with physical pain. So I mean, being excluded from any sort of society, has real physiological impacts, and it's really important for us to try to promote diversity and inclusion, and not make one subset of a minority population group feel even more excluded than they already do.
Nowadays you also see so much suspicion, as you mentioned. You've been critical of Muslims, or rather community leaders and political leaders who accuse Muslims of not condemning acts of terror. We often hear that after there's been some act of violence. Well, we didn't hear Muslim leaders say anything about it, That's not true, because I have followed this as a news person here. It's just somebody's decided not to listen to that.
That's exactly right, Anand. And you know what I always tell people when they come out with this meme that Muslims don't condemn terrorism enough? I tell them, if you go to Google and type in the words Muslim condemn terrorism, you will receive over 17 million results. So if after that you do not believe that Muslims condemn terrorism, you simply don't know how to use a computer. But like you said, there are some people who just don't want to listen, right? They have their framework, they have their pathology when it comes to Islam and Muslims, and I always tell them that I could literally spend every single day of every single week of every single month of every single year for the rest of my living days with a megaphone standing on a street corner condemning terrorism, and it still wouldn't be enough. And there are thousands of Muslim civic leaders, religious scholars, and public intellectuals who have spent our entire lives and careers, especially after 9/11, condemning terrorism. And the fact of the matter is that if people don't think that we're condemning terrorism, they simply don't know how to use a computer.
Right, and to counter Islamophobia, I mean, in many instances, and this is not just unique to the United States, the tone in a country is set by its leadership. I mean, is the leadership in this country doing enough? We got President Obama, who is a Christian actually, but he's also been the target of anti-Muslim sentiments. He visited a mosque in Baltimore recently, and he addressed this particular issue of Islamophobia. Let's take a listen to what he said.
If you're ever wondering whether you fit in here, let me say it as clearly as I can. As President of the United States, you fit in here, right here. You're right where you belong. You're part of America, too. You're not Muslim or American, you're Muslim and American.
Are leaders like President Obama doing enough to counter this?
No. And the reason is because of the fact that when President Barack Obama was running for office in 2008, there were whisper campaigns going on all over the United States of Barack Obama being some sort of crypto-Muslim Manchurian candidate, right? To the point where even in 2015, there was a plurality of the American public, a majority of the Republican Party, who still believes that President Obama is a Muslim. You know, even in the year 2015, 7 years later, and even that visit to a Baltimore mosque happened in the 7th and 8th year of his presidency, right? Because of the fact that essentially it had become a slur to even be associated with Islam or Muslims. And for those journalists who remember, in 2008, you know, there was no meaningful pushback from Democratic or Republican leaders until former Secretary of State Colin Powell had to go on Meet the Press on NBC News with Tim Russert 1 month before the election, and basically then tell his Republican Party to shut the hell up. And then we finally saw it quell a little bit. But again, up until that point, that sort of Islamophobic, anti-Muslim sentiment about Barack being some sort of crypto-Muslim Manchurian candidate went unabated. And, you know, sadly, many Republican politicians have capitalized on that in the 8 years since.
Yeah, Colin Powell, I think, did say at the time, I think he dispelled these rumors that Barack Obama was Muslim, but he also said, and what if he is?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
He's like, I want to live in a country where a 9-year-old child a Muslim child can dream about being president one day.
Right. Do Muslims need to do more to counter Islamophobia in this country?
Well, I think we have to continue to do what we have been doing, and that's getting out and getting to know our neighbors of different backgrounds, religions, and ethnicities. You know, at the end of the day, as a human rights lawyer, I always tell people that when people are humanized to you, you're far less likely to demonize them. And there have been public opinion polls that have been done that show that over 70% of Americans say that they don't even know a Muslim, even though their doctor's probably a Muslim, their mechanic's probably a Muslim, their accountant is probably a Muslim, and they just don't know it. And so that's why it's important for mosques, churches, synagogues, temples, you know, civic organizations to get to know one another. Again, the more people are humanized to you, the less likely you are to demonize. And so it's important for us to get outside of our comfort zones and get to know people who are not like us so that we can expand our own horizons and promote diversity and inclusion in America.
And you also get times when the conventional view is shattered. London just elected a Muslim mayor.
Yeah, that was huge. I mean, the election of Sadiq Khan in London was not only a great victory for multiculturalism in London, but I think it gave a great sense of hope to young Muslim Westerners out there, some Muslim kids out there, that, you know what, here's a guy who is the son of a Pakistani bus driver in London, you know, who grew up in subsidized housing and who ended up, you know, becoming a human rights lawyer and then becoming the mayor of one of the largest Western metropolises in the world. It was a great victory for multiculturalism.
And his religion was just completely irrelevant.
Well, it was irrelevant to him and to the vast majority of Londoners who voted for him, but his conservative rival, you know, tried to, you know, drive that political wedge issue, the religion as a political wedge issue. But again, the better angels of London happened to prevail.
If you look at the subtitle of your book, you say, inflammatory statements that we hear, recruitment for groups like ISIL and for Al-Qaeda. Is that what happens?
Yeah, like I said to you earlier in the show today, that, you know, Donald Trump's soundbite of banning Muslims from the United States has shown up on Al-Shabaab recruitment videos in Somalia. Again, we live in an instant communication age now, right? So when something is said or something goes viral on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, that's instantaneously broadcast all over the world. Right. And so we can't just call this empty political rhetoric, because it's not. And again, it might be Muslims today, but it's going to be somebody else tomorrow. And that's why it's essential for people of conscience, of all different backgrounds, to speak out against xenophobia of all kinds, whether it is Islamophobia, whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's homophobia, anti-black racism, anti-immigrant xenophobia. You know, it's important for us to be allies to one another, again, to help humanize ourselves and make our multicultural societies even stronger in terms of diversity and inclusion.
All right, you've written the book. Former President Jimmy Carter said it is important. We can see his quote up there on your book. What do you hope it will accomplish?
What I hope it will accomplish, Anand, is that we as American Muslims and Western Muslims are trying to, we're trying to help our societies as best as possible. And again, as a human rights lawyer, as somebody who's been a part of this media zeitgeist for the last 15 years, you know, to talk about historical parallels from scapegoats past, so that we don't make the mistakes for future scapegoats, which are going to be out there. And so it's important for us to see where we are today in the year 2016, in this post-9/11 world that we're in, see the role of 1.7 billion Muslims of all different stripes, ranging from progressive all the way to orthodox, from Indonesia all the way to Brazil, and showing people that we are just as diverse as everyone else, that we're not a monolithic entity, that all Arabs are not Muslim, that all Muslims are not Arabs, you know, that we are mayors of London, that we are boxing champions named Muhammad Ali. We are stand-up comedians named Dave Chappelle. And that we're musicians like Ice Cube. That we're just normal human beings, and that nobody should ever be ostracized or marginalized based on any sort of demographic feature that they hold inside of their body.